earlier this week it was X-Men Day, so we have been celebrating almost 20 years worth of X-Men films. So this past Monday being X-Men Day, and in about 3 weeks on June 7th we have Dark Phoenix, a new X-Men film. I thought I'd quickly go down the list and rank my favorite X-Men movies from the franchise, including the 2 Deadpool films. So again, I'm going to try and cut down on my times for videos. I'm going to jump right into it at number 11 because there's 11 of them. Last on the list is going to be Apocalypse. Unfortunately, I was really excited when this movie came out, but it just didn't do it for me. I was going to say Poe Dameron. Oscar Isaac was great, but I think everything they did with Apocalypse was just too much. I thought Psylocke was cool and all that, but it was really all over the place. I don't know, that was just too all over the place. I won't go too in depth. Next up is Origins, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Looking back at this film, I liked it at the time that it came out, and then watching it again, it again introduced characters that led nowhere. It was cool to see a version of Gambit finally, but then that was never brought up or never, continued on later. So we had Wade, and it was like an introduction to Deadpool, but like a bad one. A sort of type Emma Frost for a second. We just had characters that were introduced and were never touched on again and like led nowhere. So it was almost like this movie was like a lot of the X-Men films made to not even connect with the others, unfortunately. Next up is Last Stand. I know it had a pretty bad rep even now, but at the time when it came out I was such a fan of it. I don't think I knew any better, but it was great. And then again, rewatching it was pretty devastating and sad to see what they had done with Jean. After X2, she had died, and then yes, she is reincarnated, she is Phoenix and all, but they just didn't do her character justice. It played too much into the love stories. There was like a love triangle with Bobby and Rogue and like Kitty Pryde. Again, another love triangle in it was Wolverine and Scott and Phoenix, and that was just too much. It made no sense, and unfortunately, I mean, honestly, even for visuals again, but I would still watch it and just still get a kick out of it because I loved it back then, but it's just bottom of the list. Next is Deadpool, the first one. I know a lot of people will criticize that, but I was just not a fan of it when it came out. I love the little tidbits of X-Men. Colossus is like the best thing to come out of the Deadpool movies, and Teenage Warhead, but the humor in the first one just didn't do it for me. I don't know what it was. I just maybe feel like because I'm not a big fan of Ryan Reynolds that the humor was just a little too try hard and it wasn't that funny, but I don't know. It's still a good movie. It's still not that low on the list. Then the original X-Men movie. This movie was a big deal for me as a kid. It's one of those staple movies that like launched me into my love of film and superheroes, and we had it on VHS. I watched it all the time. Rewatching it, the senator guy that, I don't know, Magneto turns into this gooey guy, freaked me out. It was really kind of creepy. We had Sabretooth, like an early version of Sabretooth, who later in like the X-Men Origins was Wolverine's brother, and again, just Bryan Singer did a majority of these films. I don't know how the writing never intertwined with any of these films to connect, but just loose ends, characters that were brought in again, but the intros to all these iconic characters, Storm, Jean, Scott, and you have like Bobby and Rogue really early on, are just really great characters. Rogue and Phoenix being like my favorite, so X-Men was just a classic staple movie. The Wolverine, that one is a little more recent, in my head at least. It's a little more recent when he goes to Japan. This movie didn't really tie into anything again until the very end, that like end credit scene where Xavier sees him in the airport, I think it was. But this was just a cool movie for action in general. The cast was awesome, the action, the fighting, all in Japan was really cool. So I just like that for the sheer enjoyment of just being an action film and Wolverine slicing people up. So that one was really cool. Besides it not really having to do anything with anyone or anything, it was still a pretty awesome movie and one of my favorites. So I have that high on the list. Now getting down to top 5. Number 5 would be X-Men First Class. I was a pretty big fan of the film after seeing it. Beforehand, I was a little skeptical. It's pretty much a prequel, the first version of it besides X-Men Origins, and the cast was pretty spot on. I really loved James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Magneto and Professor X. They really like embodied these characters in an early version of them that we've come to know pretty well now. So the casting was pretty great. Just giving, I know Jennifer Lawrence being a big actress right now, and for the past like few years, giving her such a big character, well, turning Raven into a bigger character than she kind of was. Not that she's not important, Mystique is really cool, but to go from where she was in the first X-Men films to now being an origin story to where she was like so profoundly connected to both these guys. And she started off good because she's kind of like an orphan, and then to now see her, and if like you have to have seen the original X-Men movie and realize she's just quiet and like she's like crazy combat person, and she's just Magneto's right hand man, and yet she had changed so much from being like a teenager. She was like in love with Hank, and she with Beast, and I don't know, it just didn't make sense. It didn't really add up. So I can see them putting Jennifer Lawrence into the film, but turning Raven into a bigger character than what she really was. She's still important, but bigger than she really was a bit much, and that was like my only critique of it. But X-Men First Class was pretty cool. Kevin Bacon was in it, a really cool version of Emma Frost. I really enjoyed that one. Then X2, X-Men United. I don't know what exactly it is about this film. I mean, I do, but I just love this one. This one's always my favorite one. I always thought of it as, oh, the one with the dam, because that's when like Phoenix dies, and it's a huge deal for Scott. And we finally are introduced to Deathstrike, and she was like super cool and iconic at the time for this film, and she still kind of is to this franchise. You'll see her all around, but it was just a really cool, I think, pivotal film in the franchise, at least for the time being, until they started making other ones. That it was a big turning point for Scott and for Phoenix, for Rogue, for all these characters. So that one just, I can watch all the time. I love that one so much. And even this kind of like Stryker character, we get a glimpse at him before we see him kind of in the prequel. So I love X2, X-Men United. That one was awesome. Deadpool 2. I didn't know what to expect going in to see this film because I wasn't a fan of the first one, but I mean, the humor is probably exactly the same to anyone else, but for me it was completely different. The tone had changed, and I was cracking up the entire time for this movie. Domino is amazing, Cable super cool. It was just the perfect sequel. Not being a fan of the first one, this one just blew it out of the water. It was so good. Even the little cameo of, you see Quicksilver in the back and like the young X-Men versions of them at the Academy. It was so cool. Just movie being hilarious and for being a comedy in the X-Men franchise, it's the best. Like, not even for action sequences, those are good too, but just sheer humor, it's perfect. And top 2, Logan. A lot of people will agree with me that this was the best, one of the best X-Men movies ever, because it was just kind of that character arc, tying the loose ends, Endgame with Tony leaving and Cap leaving kind of situation. We lose Professor X, we now lose Logan, but we were introduced to X-23, the younger version, which I would hope they'd carry on, but it doesn't seem like they will, but a younger version of a prototype of what Logan was. And this is an entire story coming to an end, at least for Wolverine. There's always more to tell with the X-Men, but Wolverine has just made so many movies and had the longest story and prequel story and just all over the place, that Logan was like an amazing, heartfelt tie closing end movie for his legacy. And when I cried in that parking lot structure after seeing that film, it was rough. And then to just go and see Deadpool 2 with the opening of Wade turning on the little charm, a little tune box thing with him through the branch of the tree, rough. And my number 1, if you haven't kind of trickled down the list already, is X-Men Days of Futures Past. I saw this entire cast at Comic-Con that the year it was being released, so it was both present and past versions of these characters. The coolest cast when Bobby came back, and you see Rogue again, and you see Kitty Pryde. Oh, everybody was back. And just to go back for Logan to be in a younger version of himself and then interact with young Charles and young Xavier was the coolest. It was just one of those fan service kind of movies where it still told an important story because it was trying to go back and prevent this whole war against mutants, but it was just a fun ride because you get to see the young and old version of these characters and they interact. And Magneto is just like amazing in every single one of these movies. It can be the cheesiest, it can be the coolest. Regardless, Magneto is always going to have like the most amazing story. Michael Fassbender is just an amazing younger version of him, and they've really kept his character intact, even in Apocalypse. Even in Apocalypse, as that movie was, his character and who he was and his storyline was still intact, and it was awesome. So Days of Future Past is my #1 X-Men movie. I can watch that one all the time. I love it so much. And now with Dark Phoenix coming out, being a big Phoenix fan, I'm nervous, and knowing the X-Men franchise, I'm nervous to what they were going to do, because what can we expect except for it's just not going to tie in? Who knows? Maybe at the very end somehow, you know, they segue to where the first X-Men movie began, where they just grow up and become professors with Professor X. That would make sense, but after everything that went down, all these movies, I don't know how they can tie in and make sense of it all, but we'll see. I really like the young cast version of Scott and of Jean Grey. Like, I'm still a fan of the cast, but Jennifer Lawrence, I feel like they're gonna give Raven a bigger part than she needs, but I'm still hopeful. I'm an X-Men fan through and through. I will enjoy it no matter what, and then probably critique it later, I don't know, but I'll enjoy it for the time being. And yeah, that's sort of a quick version of ranking my favorite X-Men films. Since it's an X-Men kind of week and it's being brought up in the next weeks, rewatch all these movies. You'll probably realize ones you liked weren't that great, and then ones that you didn't like at first are actually pretty good. So enjoy some X-Men, reminisce, and thanks for watching.